Okay, let's look at your sheet, Roman numeral 4, that says the power of compound interest. I don't know if you've ever heard anybody share this before, but if you take 1 penny and double it every day, 1 penny and double it every day. Now, I'm not sure I did it correctly because by the time you do it a bunch of times, you get lost in it. But I came up with, by the end of 1 month, 1 penny doubled every day. At the end of 1 month, you'll have $21,474,836. Now, what in the world's that got to do with what we're talking about? If you take just a penny worth of trauma, damage, or whatever, early enough in life, and compound it through a lifetime, it grows into an immense amount of trouble. So when something happens is very important. When I'm counseling people, someone comes to me, let's say a person comes to me for divorce recovery, or just to help them get through a divorce, okay? So they come to me, and here's the deal. In a sense, this is oversimplifying, and it's just one of many things you're sort of trying to figure out. But one of the things you're trying to figure out is the problem that brought them to counseling situational, or is it developmental? Now, what do I mean by that? Situational is just what it sounds like. Did a situation bring them to me? Well, this person comes for divorce help dealing with a divorce. Well, is that situational or developmental? That's situational. They're getting divorced. They want help dealing with it. Okay? So you start working with them to get them through the divorce and dealing with all the emotional stuff of the divorce. Well, at some point in the process, the thought comes up, I may want to get married again someday. How can I not make this mistake again? Now, what did we just shift to? We just shifted from situational to developmental. Because the only way to help this person, man or woman, not make that kind of mistake again is to go back and figure out what their heart's full of from a lifetime of learning. You follow me? And that becomes a developmental issue. Remember the growth rings of the tree that we had up here a minute ago? You got growth rings of a tree. The situation is that pain or trauma that they experience at some stage of life, right? I mean, that's a situation, but it affects that stage of life they're in and everyone after it. So it was a situational crisis, but it became a developmental issue because it affected the way they progressed out through life. It might have affected their trust. It might have affected their self-esteem. It might have affected whatever. And then that affects the following stages of life. Affects the way they choose friends and activities and things of that sort. All right, let's look at your notes. Roman numeral 4a. Everything in life has seasons or stages. Excuse me, everything. Nature, everything has seasons or stages. That means that it grows through different seasons and stages marked by characteristics and things. Look at number 3. Each stage or season is characterized by specific issues, developmental tasks, potential crises, and opportunities that are unique to and typical of that stage or season. Childhood has certain characteristics. Adolescence, early adulthood, marriage, early marriage, marriage after children come. Life is full of seasons and stages, full of them. And it's imperative that we learn how to get what we're supposed to get out of each one to get ready for the next one. Okay, number 4 on the next page. Problems arise in the following 3 ways. Number 1 is trauma. If we experience trauma at a stage or season, it affects or interrupts the following ones. It's just a very, very powerful thing. Not a very fancy word, but stuckness. Stuckness simply means the failure or interruption at an earlier stage of development. For instance, can a parent teach a child something he or she never learned? So if the parent didn't learn something that child needs, that child's going to be stuck there at the same level the parent's at as it leaves that stage of life, because it's just not there. They don't have it to give. Another problem is denial, and that is not acknowledging or adjusting to life stages. In other words, when you leave one stage of life and go to the next, you've got to adjust to that next stage. For instance, some children, because of deficiencies in their child rearing, for instance, raising a child that doesn't learn to handle responsibility correctly. Here's little Johnny, and you want to teach little Johnny how to make his own bed and take care of his own responsibilities. Well, you say, little Johnny, you make your bed and you can go out and play. Well, you come in a little while later, and Johnny's gone playing, and his bed's not made. Well, you're just a loving parent, and you care so much about little Johnny that you go ahead and make his bed for him, because you know he's having fun out there playing. Well, about 15 or 20 years later, some man or woman's going to want to come back, scratch your eyes out, because you raised a spoiled, rotten brat that they now live with. Because you didn't make little Johnny or whoever learn to take responsibility for what he or she should be responsible for. So that person has shifted from one stage or season of life to the next one, but isn't adjusting properly. I've had people in counseling who are now married, and they still act like they're single. Can you believe I've actually had, usually husbands, but can you believe I've actually had a husband sit in a counseling session and say to me, in response to something the wife said, "You mean she has a right to know where I am all the time?" A married man now. And he was serious. "Do you mean if I want to spend the night out with friends, I have to tell her where I am?" I'm like, how do you respond to that? I mean, the point is, this gentleman did not understand that I shifted seasons and stages. I was single, I'm now married. All the rules are changed. But he didn't adjust to them. Is that a problem? It's a big problem. It's a big problem. So it's very important to recognize, as I work with people, as you watch the people you're around yourself and others, it's important to observe if there's some developmental aspect to what you're going through. Is there something I should have gotten way back here that I didn't get that has affected me all these years? Well, guess what? You can ask God to give it to you now. Now, is that going to undo all those years? No. But it can sure help you to get it now and try to learn how to put it into practice. All right, number 5, the way you leave one stage or season determines the way you enter the next. How many of you know if you leave elementary school not able to read, middle school is not going to go very well? Well, just apply that to life in general. If you leave a stage of life deficient in the skills you're going to need at that next stage of life, it's going to affect how that stage of life goes. And it just compounds from one stage to the next. So when people are in front of me, or you, not you as a counselor, but when we're just trying to get along with people, it helps to just take a developmental thought process and think about where they're at. We'll say some more about that in just a minute when we get to this next section. All right, section 5, the debris left in our soul. We won't say a whole lot about this, but let's just take a minute and look at it. And these are just some examples. And whenever you're counseling or working with people, you don't put these kinds of words on things, but these just help you get a feeling for some of what's going on inside of people. Strongholds, structures, systems, and scripts. Strongholds are a fortress of thoughts, and they're destructive patterns of thought, belief, or behavior. These are some of the things that we've been talking about, where we have information we've acquired over a lifetime of learning that are like these fortresses in our mind, and all the other information's got to pass through them and be approved by them. In other words, kind of the example I've used, the not believing that I deserve to prosper. Well, when information would come to me, it would have to pass through that stronghold and either be approved or rejected. And that stronghold in other words, I would see the things about myself that supported my belief. And I was not good at seeing the part of myself that disagreed with that belief. Now, if I talked to people around me that loved me, they'd say, man, I don't know why do you feel this way about yourself? You're this and you're that, and you're strong here, and man, I'm sure God appreciates this about you. But I wouldn't see it about myself. And I'd say, really, am I that way? And they'd say, yeah, man, what are you, crazy? You don't see that? But I didn't see it because this stronghold prohibited me from seeing things about myself that disagreed with it. Structures are fixtures or landmarks in your soul. One little thought you might want to write under that is ideal, I-D-A-L, ideal images. We store ideal images, like all of us store an ideal father, an ideal mother, an ideal wife, etc. Now, the problem is, who do we build that model on? The father and mother, and et cetera, that we've had. So we store away these fixtures in our soul, and then we kind of live life looking for that ideal person. Are they hard to find? They can be real hard to find. Another thought you might want to put under this one, structures, is life themes. Life themes. We develop like a life theme that we then try to live out. And sometimes they're okay, and they're like a vision or a dream, and they propel us, but sometimes they're very destructive and twisted and built upon our faulty self-esteem. In the Old Testament, God would use the word remember. He'd say, do this and that to remember my covenant. Well, the word remember is an interesting word. It means to create a fixture in your mind. And I just got this vision back years ago studying to preach on this in this area, that God wanted us to take certain truths in the Bible and make them as fixed pieces of furniture, you might say, in our mind, where every time we walk into the household of our mind, we see these pieces of furniture. And one of the fixtures that I have in mind, for instance, is the blood covenant. The blood covenant that we have with God is a fixture in my mind. So anything I hear about God, the devil, me, or anything else, it has to pass past, it has to go by the fixture of the blood covenant. And I think about it through the eyes of the blood covenant, and I say, nope, God wouldn't let that happen because I have a covenant with him. Or God wants this or that to happen because I have a covenant with him. So it became a fixture in my mind. And you can't shake me off of that because it's a fixture. Well, God's going to let the devil do this to you. Baloney. Why? Because I have a covenant with God. God cannot allow my enemy to prosper against me. Why? Because he's in covenant with me. And if anybody comes to fight me, he's got to fight God to get to me. And that's a fixture in my mind. How did it get that way? I worked to build it there, a brick at a time, by meditating on Scripture and things of that sort, and being around wonderful people that encouraged it in me. All right, systems. Systems are the complex, subconscious set of rules and roles that govern our relationships with others. In other words, within us, we sort of figure out this is how life works. This is how a family, this is how a dad acts, and a mom, and kids. And we learn our role, and we get very good at playing it. And these are some of the things that we want to bust up through counseling. And then a script, a multi-step reaction that's been programmed to run automatically in response to certain cues or triggers. How many of you, the phrase pushing someone's button? Well, there's some people you act a certain way or, toward them, and they have this repeated reaction that they go into. I tease my wife all the time, and I tell her that, you're so easy to provoke. I said, it's like putting a quarter in a machine. Boom, here it is. And I'm teasing her because I can get her worked up so easy if I want to. And it's playfully. But I tell her it's like putting a quarter in a machine. Well, all of us have these programmed steps of reaction. Well, it's good sometimes to slow the thing down and figure out, okay, why do I react this way? Why, when somebody does this or come at me that way, do I always end up over here every time? And you can examine that process, and you can break it down and do something about it. But it takes some work. All right, let's go into lesson 6. The ABCs of behavior. This is just sort of a collection of some thoughts I've pulled together over the years of working with people. And these are some by the time we get through, there's some pretty serious material we've got to look at here. Every behavior serves a purpose. As crazy as it may sound, we do not repeat behavior if we don't get something out of it. I don't care if we're the abuser or the abusee, we're getting something out of it or we wouldn't do it. Now the statement there says, either avoiding or approaching. In other words, what we're getting out of it might not be something we're getting. The payoff might be something we're avoiding. For instance, assume for the moment that because of a lifetime of learning and the kind of environment you grew up in, let's just assume for the moment that you just hate confrontation. I mean, you'd rather take a beating than confront. You just can't stand conflict. I mean, you just shrivel up. Oh, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. So, what's that going to do to you? You're going to be in situations where you are taken advantage of. And you're going to get back there and back there and back there. And you're going to act like you hate being taken advantage of. But guess what? You hate confrontation more than you hate being taken advantage of. So what's your payoff? Your payoff is you successfully avoid confrontation. Now you get taken advantage of. So it looks like, oh, that's dumb. I don't do that because I don't get anything out of it. What I get out of it I don't like, but it's not true. What you get out of it is the avoidance of conflict. Or, better yet, you fear rejection and you hate conflict because I'm afraid if I upset you, you won't like me. So what you really fear is rejection. So again, the point I'm making is we don't do anything that doesn't pay us. But you got to be sneaky. The payoff might not be something you get. It might be something you avoid. Moving towards something desired or away from something dreaded. All right? All right, there's 3 components to every behavior: feeling, thinking, and doing. No matter what's going on, it's got a feeling component to it, a thinking component, and a doing component. No matter how fast they all run together, they're all there. They're all involved in the formula, all 3 of them. A is the activating event, whatever it is that triggers. C is your reaction. But between A and C is the underlying facts or feelings stored in your belief system. So you're confronted with something, you reach down, not physically or literally, but in a sense, you reach down into what's stored in your heart, all the different facts and feelings stored there, and you choose a reaction. Now, how fast can that happen sometimes? That fast. But you've dipped into what's stored in your heart and you've chosen a reaction based on what's stored down in your heart. Okay? Now, this is going to sound a little weird, but it isn't, and it'll help you look and think about this stuff. When someone comes to me for counseling, I've been taught and learned how to do C, to switch my focus from content to process. Now, don't get thrown by these words, but I do need to let you know that you need to change something. I believe there's a mistake still in your syllabus. On number 2, what is the last word in the sentence? Okay, it should be content. So scratch out process and write content. In number 3, scratch out content and write process. It's really not going to make sense unless you do that. 2 should be content and 3 should be process. I just wanted to get you there before we even got into this section. All right, you want to learn to switch. I mean, this is for your own life or anybody's life. You want to learn to switch your focus from the content to the process. Number 1, most people come to counseling thinking, if I can just change my blank, My surroundings, my circumstance, my husband, my wife, my kids, my mother, my father. If I can just change blank, I'll feel better about myself and my life will go better. But it's not true. If you changed everything around you, it would only be a matter of time and you'd reproduce it. Why? Because out of what's in your heart, you built your outside. Why? So that you could feel at home. Because home is when the outside matches the inside. So if we change the outside all around you, it won't be long, you'll build it back. Unless we change the inside. You ever heard these stories? And I don't know anybody that this has happened to, so I can't tell you, but I've heard it. I've heard people that were, just normal, everyday people, and they somehow came into millions of dollars. I've heard it said to me that those people generally lose it all and get back to where they started. Now, if that's true, why would that be so? Because they want the outside to match the inside. And then I've heard the opposite, that you can take a millionaire's money from him and before long he'll have it back. Why? Because he's a millionaire in here. So he'll work, he or she will work to where the outside matches the inside. Now, how does this fit to what we're talking about? The circumstances, number two, the circumstances or situation that brings somebody into counseling is the content. Right to the side, that's the what of their problem. In other words, bottom line, somebody sits down in front of me for counseling, I ask them, I try to get creative, but usually it boils down to something real simple. Why are you here? What brought you to pick up the phone, call me, and make an appointment? I mean, I don't have a clue unless we interviewed on the phone. But the bottom line is the content is what? What brought you to counseling? The crisis, the presenting problem, the identified patient is a big fancy word for it. The bottom line is what brought you here? What made you think you needed to get help? That is the what of counseling, the content. Number three says how the circumstances or situation, how the what of counseling was created and how it's maintained is the process. In other words, the content is the problem that brought them to counseling. The process is what created this problem. What series of events created this problem? Okay? Now, here's an interesting way to describe this. When people come to me for counseling, it's like they bring an egg. Imagine an egg, just like you'd get up tomorrow morning and crack and fry in a pan. Imagine an egg. So they come to me for counseling, and they drop this egg in my hands. It's a very fragile, messy egg if it breaks. So they drop this egg in my hand. The egg is the problem. And they say, help us deal with this egg. One of my favorites is families will bring kids, teenagers particularly, and they'll push this kid through the door in a sense, figuratively, and what do they say? Fix this kid. Now what do I say? I smile and say glad to. But here's what I say. After he and I or she and I meet a time or two, do you think maybe mom and dad be willing to come in and help us? Because what do I know? Kids don't break. Families do. So kids don't have problems. Families have problems. I can't fix their kid if they won't let me fix the family. The kid is the content. The family is the process. So they drop this egg in my hands. Guess what I start doing? Buck, 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 buck. Where's the chicken that laid this egg? See, they drop an egg in my hands. I see the egg. Cool. Where's the chicken that laid this egg? You follow me? The egg's the problem. The chicken's the process that created the problem. If all I do is deal with this egg, guess what that chicken's going to do? It's going to lay another egg. You follow me? Now that's content and process. So the whole time I may, and I don't mean this to be deceptive or manipulative, it's just the facts of life. I may act like I'm totally focused on this egg, but I'm not. I'm really looking for that chicken. Where's that chicken? And you know, he's clucking in the room somewhere, clucking in the room somewhere. Rock, buck, 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 buck. And it doesn't take long. Here's the problem. It doesn't take long for me to figure out where the chicken is. But what did I tell you earlier? It doesn't do much good for me to find that chicken. They've got to find that chicken. And they've got to want to cut that chicken's head off, or it's going to lay more eggs. Am I making sense? You've got to switch your focus from content to process. Oh, I've got a headache. Give me a couple aspirin and get rid of the headache. No, I'll give you a couple aspirin to get rid of the headache, but let's figure out why you keep getting this same headache. And let's change something about the way you're living so you don't keep getting this same headache. Look at number 4. Ever wondered why there's frequently new names, new faces, new places, but same old story? Why is that the case? Right underneath there, because I want to go home. Because I want to go home. Now, I can crack the egg and deal with the egg for them, but guess what? They're going to lay another one. Unless we change home, where? On the inside. Home is when the outside matches the inside. Well, if I want outside circumstances to change, what do I have to change? The inside, not the outside. If you change the inside, the outside will take care of itself. Look at number 5 on your next page. Our focus needs to be on the process that created the problem, because if we adjust or change the process, the content, the problem, will take care of itself. They bring this kid, they push him through the door, and they say, fix this kid. And I say, glad to. Let's go to work. So we start working on this kid. But I said early in the deal, well, would you guys come? So I talked. How many of you know most kids can tell you what the problem is? Kids know better than the adults do. So you meet with the kid a time or two, and before long you got to lay out how the whole family works. Mom this, dad that, sister this, boom, boom, boom. So then you say, Mom and Dad, come on in, let's chat a little bit. And you talk a little bit, and they're full of baloney. I mean, they're just, not even close. Just not even close. Well, but the kid's sitting there. And you say, well, Johnny, what do you think? And you've met with him a time or two, so he knows he's allowed to be truthful. And you look at Mom and Dad, and you say, can Johnny speak his mind freely? Sure, go ahead. Next thing you know, Johnny drops a bomb because he tells the truth. Well, guess what you just did? You just brought the most freeing agent of all into the room, because truth sets us free. And all of a sudden, maybe not that day and maybe not the next, but all of a sudden, before long, the family realizes the truth hurts, but it really does work. And all of a sudden, the whole family is beginning to feel better, because the things they were trying to hide are easier to deal with if they quit hiding them. Now, this is I've got one literally in mind, and this is a family that the stuff was, workable. But the point is, you focus on the process that created the problem, not what they think is their problem. I have a phrase I use a lot. Your problem's not your problem. Your solution to your problem is your problem. Your problem's not your problem. Your solution to your problem is your problem. Now, let me just give you some thoughts to just give you a feel for some of what I mean when I say to switch your focus from the content to the process. So, if you can imagine, here's a family sitting in front of me, husband, wife, kids, whatever. And I've got to figure out, okay, here's the problem they brought me. What is it that produced this problem and is creating it or maintaining it, What produced it and maintains it? So here's some of the things you watch for. The communication patterns. When you want to monitor the process in this family, you monitor the communication patterns. Who talks to whom? Who gets left out? Who talks the most? Who talks the least? You just kind of watch this stuff. It doesn't take a rocket scientist. You just have to be observant. One of my favorites is this one. You got a husband and a wife sitting there, and you ask one of them a question, and the other one answers. Well, I got one thing I do that's so fun because it's just fun to watch it kind of make people twitch. Say I'm talking to one of them over here, and I ask this one a question, and this one begins to answer. Well, what I've learned to do is I don't even turn my head. I ask this one a question, and this one's literally answering the question. Well, I don't even look. And I just sort of pause a moment, and usually they realize what's happened, and then I turn and I just say, when I ask you a question, you can answer, and when I ask you a question, I would like you to answer. Now, what have I just done? Not only have I observed the process, I've interrupted it. Now, that might have been something that family does and doesn't even realize they're doing it. Maybe. Now, does that mean breakthrough, they'll never be the same? Maybe 1 in a million, but it's a start because you're beginning to introduce some truth. So one of the things you do is monitor communication patterns. You just kind of watch, you know. No wonder Junior's so mad. They ignore him, or they're insensitive, or they're whatever. You know, one little phrase I keep real close in my mind is rules without relationship result in rebellion. Rules without relationship result in rebellion. Kids don't mind being told what to do if they know you love them. But if you have no relationship with someone, they don't want to hear your rules. So rules without relationship result in rebellion. Okay, what else do you do when you're monitoring the process? Another thing is you watch how they make decisions. You know, is there one power broker? Do they seem to have a generally gentle flow to it? Or, you know, it's kind of fun when you ask a decision-oriented sort of question and everybody, it's almost imperceptible, but everybody looks to the same person. And it might not be the one you think. And they might not even want you to see who they look to. Because it's sort of an understood thing that we pretend this one's in charge when really this one is. I mean, families are sneaky the way they do things. But you kind of watch who makes decisions. Does it seem fair? Does it seem abusive? Does it seem manipulative, intimidating, whatever? You just watch that. And you're just, again, you're monitoring the process that created the content that is the problem. You're looking for that chicken. I know that chicken's in this room. Where's the chicken? And you're looking for that chicken. Now, the chicken might not even be in the room. Remember transgenerational sowing and reaping? The real creator of the problem might be a generation back. In fact, it usually is. But it's manifesting in the room through the people you're dealing with. Okay, another thing you will look at is conflict. What's their tolerance for conflict? How is it handled? When there's a little bit of conflict, in fact, because of my desire to monitor the process, I stir up conflict on purpose, deliberately, because I want to see what they do with it. Does everybody in the room just sort of shut down? It's sort of like this unspoken rule, you know, conflict's bad. Good Christians don't get mad. And you just kind of watch. How does this family deal with conflict? Does somebody get real big and intimidating and sort of shut everybody else down? Does somebody get louder and animated? You know, in other words, what goes on? What are the rules they've learned to live by? And you just kind of watch, you know, it's kind of fun, really. Do they just, like I said, do they just avoid it badly? Another one is the climate or tone. I mean, how do they feel? Do they feel warm? Do they feel cold? Here's an interesting one. One day, just one of the parents and the child comes, and the whole atmosphere is different. Boy, this is weird. All of a sudden, this one parent and the one kid's here, and the other one parent's not there for this one appointment. And I mean, these two are bubbly and talking and lively. And when the other parent's there, everybody's real subdued and whatever. It's like, whoa, are this the same people? But the climate's totally different with this one person out of the picture. So you watch that. What's going on here? What's the chemistry of this bunch? We've talked about it earlier. Everybody has thermostat settings, right? What are their thermostat settings for emotional expression? You know, you give them, you know, make them do something just to see how they handle it. Well, sir, do you love your wife? Oh, I sure do. Would you tell her so? And he starts fumbling all over himself. And you know, and you watch her like, you know, what's the deal? Is this hard? And you just kind of watch how what is their tolerance for emotional expression? You know, is this making sense? You just kind of watch the process of how this family does family. And it's very, very revealing and helpful, very enlightening to help you catch the chicken. All right, D on the same page, capital letter D. One of the things I've learned to do is use a trifocal lens. And what I mean by that is I learned to look at the situation from three distances, you might say. One is the personal dynamics. In other words, I don't care if I've got one person in the room or 10. Each one of them is a separate individual with separate issues. Now, what do I mean by personal dynamics? Well, physiologically, is there anything going on? Generally speaking, I always ask, is there anybody on medication? What medication? What for? How long? You know, is it working? In other words, I want to know if there's anything about any particular person I need to know. Has there ever been any serious trauma to any of you? Why is that important? Well, one thing I like to know about is brain trauma. Has anybody ever had an accident where they were unconscious? Has anybody ever been in a severe accident where they were in a coma? That's important information, because when you shake, rattle, and roll this thing on top of your shoulders, sometimes it doesn't come out the same as it went in. This is a fragile piece of stuff up here. And you bang it around hard enough, and stuff up there just doesn't settle back the same. When I was doing my practicum, getting my master's degree, I got to spend time with each of the people in the mental health center that I was working in. And one of the people I spent time with was one of the psychiatrists, which is a medical doctor. Well, it was a precious gentleman, and he was all excited about spending time together. And I mean, he'd just been thinking about it. And he said that what he wanted to do was he wanted to talk about it. It was, you know, he set the agenda. And during his little time with me, he wanted to talk about something that he wished someone had told him. And what it was he said, I want to tell you the two hardest, basically, he wasn't a Christian, so I would not say this same thing. But he said the two just absolute, never going to change kind of people. In other words, you work with these people and you'll just never see any change. And the two he said were, one was a borderline personality disorder, which isn't important for what we're dealing with. Christian-wise, we'd see that all differently anyways. But the second thing he said was someone who's suffered severe brain trauma. He said if someone suffers severe brain trauma, their personality can be altered, and you cannot fix it through therapy. You can't really now, he would say you can't fix it. We would say time to believe for a miracle. But your brain can be traumatized to the place where physiologically it just doesn't come back to the same. There have been people who suffered brain trauma who were kind, gentle, soft-spoken people. They have a car accident, brain trauma, whatever, and they have anger problems. It's kind of like, not a stroke, but oh goodness, where you have forget it. But brain trauma is something important. Bottom line is just personal dynamics. You just want to know about that particular person, if there's anything that's going on with them that you might need to know. Each one you want to know about. All right, then B, you want to know the family or system dynamics, and that's kind of what we were just talking about. You want to get an understanding for how this family operates, but you also want to get a feel for this. Remember, everything has seasons and stages. So what you want to get a feel for is what's the life cycle of this family been like? Let's just say you're there, and what brought them to you is a 10-year-old kid. Well, they've been married 10, 12, 15 years. So you want at B here, you want to get a feel for what's life together been like. And, they tell you about the early marriage was this way. And, well, after our first child, it was like this. And so you want to look at it from that perspective also. And then the third thing is the transgenerational. And during this transgenerational phase, we do what's called a genogram. Is that written down there? No, write the word genogram, G-E-N-O-G-R-A-M. A genogram. This is a cool little way to see something. A genogram, say I'm counseling with a family, what you do is you use squares for men and circles for women, and you just kind of draw a spiritual family tree is what I call it. So I'm sitting here talking to Bill and Mabel. I don't know why I thought of Mabel. How do you spell Mabel? M-A-B-L-E? Pardon me? So we're talking to Bill and Mabel. Is there a Mabel around? Okay. And Bill and Mabel have a couple of kids. They got a son who's firstborn, and we'll call him Bill Jr. And then they've got Mabel Jr., and then they had a third daughter. And let's see, this one's 12 and 10 and 9, okay? And they've been married 11 years. Anything strange about that, by the way? And this is Sarah. So, did I get any information yet that should be useful? Yeah. And then you ask them, well, gee, the numbers don't quite add up. Well, we lived together for a while before we got married. Oh, how long? 5 years. So we've been together for a total of 16 years. Is that important? Yeah, I'd say it's kind of important. So, you kind of amble around here, anything unusual, whatever, But then what makes the genogram interesting is then you go up a little bit and you do Bill's family. And you find out that Bill is the last born of, I don't know, we'll just use a couple. We'll say 3. So Bill's the last born of 3, and Dad's passed away, and they were married, I don't know, we'll say 30 years before Dad passed away. Mom hasn't remarried, and blah, blah, blah. And, you go into all that, and then you go over here and do the same thing, and just for the fun of it, we'll make Mabel the firstborn. And, oh, I'm sorry, I did that wrong. The bottom line is, how many of you can see where this would be interesting? And you start, and then what you do is you ask questions. Let's say his name's Fred, just to make it different. Fred and Betty, how about that? And you just ask, well, Bill, what was it like growing up with Fred and Betty? And he says, oh, Fred was a hard-working man, and blah, blah, blah. And you just kind of, you just put different things up here, and Betty different things, and blah, blah, and before long, they're making connections that they've never seen before. They're seeing aspects of their family tree flowing down toward them that they've never seen before. Now, what you like to do, if possible, is get 3 to 4 generations. So if possible, you want to even go a little bit higher, even if you just get sketchy information. I mean, I've had some really fascinating. What's interesting is, let's just say Bill's an alcoholic. What do you think is very possible you're going to see on this board? Gee, so was Fred. What else do you think you're going to see? So was Granddad. Now, what do you think that does for Bill? Number one, it helps Bill realize I didn't get this way by myself. I didn't wake up one day and say, gee, I think I'll be an alcoholic. He has a transgenerational pattern of sowing and reaping. Now, does that end his problem? No, but it helps him carry it differently. Now, we also probably found Betty has certain characteristics. What are we probably going to find about Mabel? She may have some of the same. Maybe, maybe not. Well, then we say, well, how did it work for Betty and Fred? And Bill says, not very good. It really was a pretty rotten marriage. Well, what brought you to me? Well, mine's pretty rotten. Well, do you want to do the same things the way Fred and Betty did, or do you want to come up with some new ways? And so and what I do is I do this on an easel in my office, and of course I cover it up when people leave. But then when Bill and Mabel are coming back for their appointment, I pull the easel back out. So I'm able to sit here and refer to this every time we meet, and we add to it. I was thinking about it, and I didn't even remember it, but my mom told me about this, that, or the other, and I have seen some things come out of these things that are amazing. I mean, just amazing. And I've seen light bulbs go on. I mean, you could see it in people's faces just doing this, as they saw transgenerational stuff they'd never seen before. And this is a fun little thing. I really, really get a lot of mileage out of this genogram. Okay, now what that's about is this trifocal lens, learning to put things in perspective, learning to look at a family from different directions. And again, remember, one of the biggest things we're looking for is we're trying to figure out that, let's just say for the sake of discussion, that what brought them to counseling was Mabel, little Mabel, the child. So that was the content. Well, all this is part of discovering what created this problem. And it's probably a transgenerational issue that's been developing and working on for years. All right? All right, last thing we'll cover tonight on your next page, number 2. Remember the key ingredients we're after. One of the key things we want to do for people in counseling, out of counseling, in a small group, in your church, wherever, is we want to develop in them and around them an atmosphere full of grace, truth, and time. Part of what I want to do, I don't want to excuse Bill for being an alcoholic. I don't want to excuse him, but I want to show him love. I want him to feel unconditionally loved and accepted while he's still an alcoholic. I don't think I told you this story, but one of my most exciting success stories. Years ago, this precious little lady comes to me. A lady in my church brought her friend who wasn't in our church at the time, and brought her little friend to me. I say little friend just because she's a petite lady, but brought this lady to me, and she pours her heart out that her husband's a drunk. He's just a daily, everyday drinker. He's an alcoholic. And she's a good old Baptist girl. In fact, if you want to know the honest truth, he was a Baptist deacon. He was a deacon of a Baptist church and drank every day. Eventually I asked him, does your pastor know? And he said, oh yeah. I said, okay, never mind. Don't want to hear any more. But she comes to me and says, basically, what do I do? And I said, well, how long's this been going on? I got enough information, so I'm not totally crazy here. And I just said, well, I'd go home and tell him 2 things. 1, I love you. I appreciate you. I'm honored to be married to you. And when we stood at that altar and said those vows, I meant every word of them. And I would be honored to spend the rest of my life with you. Point number 2, but I'm not living this way any longer. Now, what do I mean by that? I love you, and I'd love to stay married to you, love to live the rest of my life with you. But I'm not living the way we're living now any longer. Well, what do I do with that? She says, well, go home and tell him. Well, what do I do with his answer? What is he going to say to me? I said, well, it was pretty bad. And I said, well, why don't you just tell him? You can stay married to him from a different address. God hates divorce, so you won't divorce him, but you don't have to live like this. Well, what do I do if he halfway responds decently? I said, well, give him 2 choices. He can come with you to see a counselor, or you can go see a lawyer and get the separation of addresses in motion. What do you think I had sitting in front of me next week? I had this sweet little lady who was quite nervous and a very angry man. Guess what I never brought up? I never brought up his drinking. I never brought it up. All I did was look him in the eye, and I said, sir, do you love this wonderful woman? He said, yes, I do. I said, would you like to have a great marriage? He said, yes, I would. I said, then, would you be willing to meet with me to learn how to have a good marriage? He said, yes, I would. And we went to work on his marriage. I never brought alcohol up. Guess who did? He did. Now, that's been years now. Guess what happened? He got off of alcohol. He went to treatment center. He went to AA. And when he was ready, he wanted to get saved. Guess what he told his wife? Because she, very capable Christian. She said, well, let's do it. And he said, no. He said, I want to go to Chip. He said, he's put all this time into counseling us. I want him to be the one to pray with me. So he waited till our next counseling session and got saved. And they're both in our church now. And we talked about all this kind of stuff, and it helped him greatly. But it was fun to watch God work like that. All right, that's it.